Hey, I am Doug Paget. Thanks for being part of this. Dan Dietrich and I are going to be leading this conversation with you all today. As we go, if you want to ask something, just go ahead and turn your mic on and interrupt us and ask away. We're going to walk you through this version of advice that we have on starting a podcast. And we hope that this webinar itself is helpful to you, beneficial, you take away a lot of it, and that you're off on your own starting a podcast. If you're interested in Dan or people in the Vote Common Good organization with our Common Good Media helping you with your podcast, we're going to talk about that at the end, what we offer. I'll just tell you now, we offer a launch package to help you get going, or we'll help you for the couple of them. You pay for that. If you want our ongoing help with producing your podcast and making it, the way you want, we're also available to do that. So, but this webinar is not designed essentially as like a product pitch. So we're not just, product pitching. We hope that you'll find this helpful. And if you think that our services would be beneficial to you, then we'd love for you to take advantage of that. If not, then, other people certainly will, and you can just free up that space for someone else. So whatever we say, please don't feel at all that we're like trying to get you to buy our services. What we want to do is to support people who are looking to have their podcast increased or to have their skills increased or something. So that's what we're up to. I'll tell you a little bit about why we're doing that. At Vote Common Good, our working assumption is the world is better when people like us and people not like us wake up, speak up, and stand up. We just need more people producing the kind of content in the world, calling for the world that we want to see. We all have a more beautiful world that our heart knows is possible. And if we can help other people to hear that world, to live into that world, to generate that world, things are better. So our belief is, it's just better if more people are talking. It's just better if more people are listening. It's just better if more people are sharing, right? So at a base level, we think this planet we live on would be better if all of you beautiful people had a podcast. Now, some people are from the perspective, there's enough people talking into microphones, there's enough podcasts in the world. We're not of that opinion. Whether anybody wants to listen to our podcast or not, whole other subject, whole other topic, right? But we would all do better if we could say and share the goodness that we know is possible, or call the world to the way we want it to be, or share the opinions we have, or have the fun that we want to have on a podcast. Whatever it is you're doing with them, we need more people. More specifically, the work that we do, trying to help people of faith to make the common good, not only their voting criteria, but how they live in the world. The more of that's alive and well in the world, there's more people who are calling folks to that, the better. We would rather have 500 more people start a podcast talking about the common good than 500 more people listening to our podcast. We think that for our work in the world would be better, our mission would be better accomplished if there were more people added into the large community, the large chorus, the large choir that needs to say some things. You might know what we do in our work, and we travel around the country, and we do a lot of things in the media and our own media and on, in news and all this. And people often will ask us if we think we're just preaching to the choir. And because of the nature of many of the people involved in our work, we say, a lot of us have been pastors or involved in leading churches. So we've known a lot of choirs, and we've known a lot of choir members. And sometimes choirs actually need a little encouragement to sing a little louder, to sing a little more passionately, to show up to rehearsal and to learn the song and to join in. So we're okay with preaching to the choir sometimes, because we need that choir to ring. We need that choir to sing. And that's what we're asking you all to do. So from our side, that's what we're doing. We also have excess capacity. Dan and Britton and Jen and some people in our world that we pay to do our projects and our work, they have more capacity to help more people. And we want them to use that to help you and to assist you if that's the kind of help that you want. And we try to fund what we do. And so if you're going to hire someone to do your work with you, or to consult with you, or to train you, and we have those people that can do it, then that makes a good match. So that's what we're up to. It fits our mission. It also fits our other work. So that's what we're doing. The intention of this webinar is for you to be as helped as you can in a free webinar. A couple of things that we're going to do. We're going to talk through a whole series of of topics and so on. And you're going to see some things pop up on my screen over on my left side over there. So you're going to see things like that. If you don't see that clearly right now, then, go up to your view and make my, highlight the speaker or whatever setting you want to have, or spotlight me the whole time, or whatever it is you want to do if you want to see what's on the screen for that part of the conversation. So we have an agenda we're going to walk you through. We'll take questions midways as we go, probably not after each and every one of our little topics, but as we go. So jot them down, or something else, you can pop them in the chat, that kind of thing. And we will, we'll be glad to talk about all those, especially at the end. We'll be glad to talk about them. All right. So are we ready to go? All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome all. Glad that you're here. Glad that you're thinking about starting a podcast. And those of you who are watching this on a video, we're recording this, I don't even know what date is, the day after the Super Bowl, the 13th of February of 2023. If you're watching this after March 1st, 2023, some of the things that we say from the things that we're offering might be a little different, because to all of you, when we get to the point about what we're offering at Vote Common Good and the Common Good Media Project to help you get your podcast up and going, is of a cheaper price for all of you than it will be for people that join us after March. So we'll talk about all that later, but just want to say that. All right. So a couple of things when you're thinking about a podcast, a few tips. As you're thinking about endeavoring into one, as you all know, because you're here, there's an assortment of topics and ideas and content that you need to sort through. One of those is thinking about what style of podcast are you going to do. Now, I want to encourage you to think more broadly than maybe what you have thought of so far. Like, if you think about the podcasts that you like, the ones you listen to, the ones that attract you, the ones that are in your podcast stream, that might be the kind of podcast you end up doing, but you might end up doing something totally different than the kind of podcast that you listen to. So I want to encourage you to think creatively about what is it that you want to produce as a podcast. Is it conversational in style? Is it you with someone? Is it chit-chatty? Is it going to involve sort of current affairs and things that are happening right now and very up in the moment of things happening right now? I listen to a number of podcasts that are very much that way. They're all, you get to know these people. They're very date specific. They're talking about things happening right now, either on topic or just in their banter. Very conversational and right now. But maybe you want to do an informational podcast that's more evergreen, that's going to exist long term, and it doesn't matter what time of the year it is, or it doesn't even really matter who you are. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You don't want to include any of that stuff at all, right? You might want a podcast that's very directed toward a certain topic. Well, each of those decisions, some others that we're going to talk about, take you down a different path. So one of the things to consider as you're thinking about your own podcast is, what is the style? Is it scripted? Is it interview-based? Is your podcast based not on your voice as much as the people you invite to join you? What is it about? Do you have a very specific set of content that you want to communicate? Is it crystal clear what it's about? I'll tell you, at Vote Common Good, when people say, what's your Common Good podcast about? We're like, well, on Tuesdays, it's about politics. On Wednesdays, it's about faith. On Thursdays, it might be about, we have an astrophysicist and an economist that join us. Other days, we do topical things. Sometimes we do news-related stuff. Our podcast is about a general potpourri of what does it mean to live as a common good person in the world. Not specific, not generated. On the other hand, we're releasing a podcast that'll come out in March that's going to be 5 or 6 episodes specifically on the threat of Christian nationalism in the United States. Comes some training that we did. It's been highly edited. It's really scripted. It has a very clear beginning and end with episodes that are designed to take people along a very specific journey. Those are both great kinds of podcasts, but this is something you're going to want to be thinking about is style-wise, generally, what is it? And again, the idea that the podcast you like may or may not be the kind of podcast that you want to produce. Anytime you're starting something new, the most important things to remember are that you are not going to be a different person in this project than you are in the rest of your life and than you have been up until this point, right? You're going to bring all of your habits, you're going to bring all of your personality, you're going to bring all of your anxieties, all of your passions, all of that's going to come with you into this new project. And you are the key figure in this new project. So however you operate your life, whatever it is that gives you energy and keeps you moving, those things are going to show up in your podcast. So as you think about what you're going to do, I would highly encourage you to make sure that you are thinking about what gives you energy, what gives you life, what's a kind of workflow that works for you. Okay. Dan, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, all of these decisions end up, like Doug said, taking you down a different path. We say it's sort of like a choose your own adventure. So say you go down this more scripted path, that's going to affect, how you set up your show, from what recording stuff you need. Do you need a dedicated space to record it in? Versus if you're just going to, wing it and do a monologue each week without guests, you can get by with just a microphone in a closet, and you don't have to worry about some of the other software stuff. So all these decisions kind of take you down a different path, and we're going to hopefully help you make sense of these decisions. Because if you go on the internet, there is so much information about starting a podcast, and it can seem overwhelming. So we're going to hopefully just walk you through some of these decisions on why this matters, why this doesn't, and why this might be helpful if you're going in this direction.
I've been doing podcasts since 2006. I launched my first podcast as a part of an effort called Blog Talk Radio. It was that was back in the day, I think, before Facebook and stuff. Before the iPhone, honestly. And I thought that blogs, if you remember those as sort of a standalone way that people were putting their voice out in the world, had become super negative and super conflictual. And I wanted to get out of the blogging world because it just seemed like it was full of people fighting. I mean, we had no idea that Twitter was on the horizon, right? But blogs used to be that, and blog comments. So I wanted to make it more audio, make it more humane, make it more people with people, not just didactic presentations of someone writing something and then later responding to comments. So we started hunting around like, well, how did you make a podcast? I mean, this was when they were just first being called podcasts because you could listen to them on an iPod, right? So I've been thinking about this stuff for a really long time. And these questions that we have up here on Style, they are evergreen questions. And I'm telling you, they are something you want to think about and consider over and over. They're not one and done choices. So you'll have to make a decision about whatever you're going to start as soon as you're going to start it. But then you're going to want to ask yourself, maybe I should be switching styles. Maybe I should be adjusting this. That sense of I'm not sure, that's okay. That's a really important part of all of this. One of the big questions a lot of people have, and it's already shown up in the chat, and I appreciate people writing this, at least it shows us that maybe our order that we have this in is the right one for now, is audio only or including video in your podcast. Some of you might know that when we do our podcast at Vote Common Good, we do it as a live stream. So we do it live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and all these platforms all at the same time. And it happens live while it's happening. And then we edit the podcast section later for some other things, which we'll talk about. But we do it as a live stream. That adds a whole lot of complexity. So the question of, can you do a podcast that involves something on the screen? Yes, you can. Look, at a basic level, a podcast is simply an audio file that someone listens to. That's it. It's just audio that we've found a way to distribute through podcast apparatus. Unfortunately, social media, other than YouTube, is not designed to share audio only. You have to have some kind of an image or video file to put it on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or any of those places, or even YouTube, right? It has to be turned into a video file. So podcast software, podcast sorting things, wherever you listen to it, whether it's on iHeart or on TuneIn, or I think some people still use the Joe Rogan podcast, the system called Spotify. If you're using all those, that's a way that you're delivering just audio, but you can deliver video as well. we're going to suggest to you that that's a major decision you want to make early on. Is it audio or is it audio and video? Because that will, as Dan said, that choose your adventure, that jumps you to a whole other place. We'll talk about that later. We'll get into that, but that's a question that you are going to want to answer and decide which one is driving the other. When we do our daily podcast, we really treat it like a live stream. So we do a lot of things with what's on the screen, and we play videos and we put graphics up, and we do a lot of that. And we just refer to those for the podcast. But this Christian nationalism podcast that we're putting out, which is a select series with a select number of episodes, a beginning and an end, that's not designed for people to be looking at things on the screen, and we're not talking over it, describing what's on the screen. It's designed to be audio only. So these are decisions that you're going to want to make and are going to want to set your path to as you go. Now, when it comes to length and description, this is another place where there's just a lot of questions for people about how they should be thinking about how long their podcast should be. Let me say that a podcast does not have to be any particular length, and it can be as long as or as short as you want it to be. Some of the most successful podcasts are 15 minutes long. Some are 30 minutes long. Some are 3 hours. There is no magic number. Now, you can Google it and you can have people give you their opinions about what podcasts work and all. And yes, that's true. And there's enough exceptions to every one of those rules that there is no determined length of a podcast or right or wrong. You can do it any way you want, but you have some decisions to make. How long do you want your podcast to be? Little advice is have your podcast generally be consistent in their length. In other words, if people get used to listening to you for 15 minutes, if you come in with a 3-minute podcast, it's not going to feel great. If you come in with a 40-minute podcast, people might be like, well, that one was a little long. I have you in my 15-minute walk podcast length, right? And some people won't care. But consistency, at least in length, can be a really important thing. The other thing you have to decide on this length is the number of episodes, the duration of the podcast. This sort of gets back to, are you going to do it every week or are you going to do a season? If you were to hire us at the end of this for our launch package, we will suggest strongly that you start with a season approach. Decide on a set of podcasts that you want to do, 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever. Decide what that is, produce those, get those into shape, and then release them when you have a backlog so that you don't feel the pressure of every week having to have a new podcast come out. Right now, some of us work in church worlds, and we know the 168-hour clock of how long a week is, that every 168 hours, church start time happens again. And that slow grade pressure that lays on top of you, having that thing coming, you may or may, that may motivate you. We're at Vote Common Good. We're glad to do that. Like we do that 3 or 4 times a week, and I like it. I like the pressure of it. I like having to do something. I like having to go down. You have to do it. That works great. If you're at all wondering how well this is going to go for you, we'd suggest that you start with a set, and then you might want to turn it into something more regular. So you've got 3 or 4 recorded. You get those, you get comfortable with them, you put them out in the world, you get a little feedback, you make some adjustments, then you get into your regular rhythm. So this question about, are you doing a set season of them with a determined number, pre-recorded and all launched when they're done? Or are you doing them in an ongoing fashion where there's a demand that you've given to your audience that you've created that says, on Thursdays, I'm going to release a podcast? That's a major decision that you're going to want to think about. So you can start to see now how this question of, well, what's the style that I'm going to use? Am I going to use conversation? Am I going to use interviews? Am I going to be audio only? Am I going to be audio and video? How long is the podcast going to be? And how frequently am I going to do them? These are all questions that you should ask at the beginning. You should keep evaluating and keep in the front of your mind. Having these as questions shows that you're thinking about the right things. It doesn't mean you're not ready. Look, we're going to make a point in a little bit. I'm going to steal the thunder of this. The most important thing for you to do is push record, get started, get going, right? But there's some decisions you have to make about what am I recording and for how long and with whom. But getting yourself ready to go is something we want to encourage you to do. So we're launching this support system, which will include a community of people for you to be around and sharing best practices. Some people in this group can be helping you just as DIY helpers, and we'll offer our launch package and our continuing work to be able to work with you ongoing if that's something you're interested in, because we want you to do this. So we think it's really great that you do it, but you really have to do it, right? That's always the trick of these things, is how do you get yourself on the move and get yourself ready to do it. Dan, anything else on any of that?
No, I think just to reiterate that you don't need much to get a podcast started. If you have a smartphone, you can start tomorrow and create a podcast. The biggest part is to just do it if you're wanting to do it. And then from there, there's a million other ways to increase the quality of your podcast, which is what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. So.
Yeah, and we'll get into this, some suggestions on equipment and how you can do it and all the rest of it. And it becomes a really important part. The most important question for you about equipment and how do you do it, and what does it take to push record, is when are you going to do it? When are you going to record it? And where? Taking stock of those questions is really important. A couple of you that we did pre-conversations with people about this, before the webinar. And some people are working in places where they already have the content. Like they're already producing things for some reason. They're speaking at a church, or they work at a seminary, or they're producing content. They have the content. What they need is to edit it and get it together and find a frame for it that fits podcasting and all that. Other people are having to create the content fresh for their podcast. So a question is, well, when are you going to do that? During the day? Are you going to do that in the evenings? Is it going to be weekends? Not telling you how to run your life, but my guess is you're going to have to pick a time and set it aside for this, or it will get squeezed out by other things. This is where it gets complicated. If you say, back in the previous question, I want to have this be interview-based that involves guests. Well, you already know. Now you got to find a time when your guests can make it. So if you're guest-oriented, you may have to be more flexible on when you could interview that guest. How are you going to capture that audio? Are you going to do it on, using an online software? Are you going to meet with them in person? How are you going to do it? And then you're dependent on their schedule. Are you flexible enough? Or do you only have a certain window of time? And that relates to where you're going to do it. I'm doing this in the basement at my house. We have adult children that have moved out. I have a basement to myself. Nobody fusses down here. Nobody comes. My wife works at home, but it's quiet enough down here that she can be upstairs doing nearly anything she's doing, and I can be recording a podcast. So my flexibility is really high. I work from home. It's really high, but I also travel a lot for work. So that becomes really hard. Like, well, how do I coordinate having to drive around in a bus or fly places or do things where I'm not even in the state of Minnesota, let alone in my basement? So I have to contend with those things. I have a set aside space, but I have a schedule that's more complex. So you're going to want to think about this. I know some people who do great podcasts and they do them, from their house, some from their apartment, and other people live there with them. They can't do their podcast when anyone else is home because people are like, seriously, you're going to take over the dining room again and we all have to be quiet for another hour and a half while you do this? Okay, then you have to do it on Saturday mornings and we're all going to leave. But then when we come home, you got to be done. Like you can't just keep, you can't sneak into 1 o'clock. So for those folks, when they have a guest, they're like, really, I got this window. This is the window when this is going to work. So these are really important considerations for you as you think about what kind of podcast. So you might say to yourself, okay, for this podcast, what I need to do is that I need to set aside 3 Saturdays. So I'll tell you a story. I'm working on a podcast with a friend of mine. We were both born in 1966, and we want to talk about a series of issues through the lens of the year 1966. And we're creating this whole 6-episode podcast. They're going to be 66 minutes long on the year 1966. Well, because of his schedule and my schedule, we met the other night and we set out 3 Saturdays in April where we're going to record this podcast. We're going to record 2 episodes on each Saturday. We're going to script them ahead of time. He's going to come over here to my house. We're going to set up separate equipment. We're going to record those. We're going to get them all together and edit them out, because that's how we need to do that podcast. He's not available. That's the only way we can do it. So as you think about how you're going to do your podcast and you're going to run into some questions, I don't know if I have time. I don't know if I can do this. There's a way to work it out. Part of what we do and are going to do in the launch package is help you think about that, help you brainstorm it, and like bring a little bit of advice and creativity to it. But this group can also do that for you. So people will be sharing, a little bit today, but also ongoing, if you want to stay in this group in communication, like a Facebook group and an email group, about how you do your podcast and what it is that works for you. And that can become very instructive for you about what it is that you can do. So you're going to have to think about a lot of things, right? Style of podcast, quality of podcast, length of podcast, topic of podcast, when and where of the podcast. And we haven't even gotten to the equipment, or how do you get that thing up on the internet, or how do you promote it? None of that's even happened yet. This is all the earlier questions that if they've all been running through your mind and you're feeling overwhelmed by those questions, or like, I don't even know if I should do this with all these questions that I have, you're asking exactly the right things. And those are the right questions to have. All right, let's talk a little bit about setup. Your setup, what you're using for your podcast, is really going to depend on what your thing is. If you've got a weekly podcast that you're recording every single week, I would highly suggest that you have a dedicated space and you don't have to set up your stuff each and every time. It gets very difficult if that's what you're doing. If it's an interview-based podcast, even more so. We'd suggest you have a dedicated space. If you don't have a dedicated space, maybe ongoing weekly interviews are not the kind of podcast that you want to run. Maybe you want to run something that you can record a number of episodes in sort of a singular period of time, a day a week or a day a month, something like that, where you can get a lot done in a small amount of time. So you can have a per episode setup, or if it's going to be is it going to be ongoing and episodic? And then you're going to have this question of, how do I actually record my audio? Okay, how do I capture it? What do I do to get what do I need? If I'm guessing many of you have already like Googled, well, what do I get for a podcast mic, right? Now this is an area I love talking about, because I love gear and stuff. Like, I have bins of things, literally have microphones behind me that I couldn't be more happy watching videos about people talk about gear. Earlier this morning, I was watching a YouTube video about podcast gear, partly to get ready and make sure I knew what was sort of new in the world. But I love that stuff. I like gear. Some people, oh my gosh, that just, it drives them crazy. They have no interest. Obviously, some people are in between. So when you make a decision about what kind of podcast you're going to do, that's going to help you to decide what kind of equipment do you need. Do you need something that looks more video related? So you don't want some big old microphone like this floating around in your face. I have a setup, which I'll show you in a minute, where I can use this microphone, or I can remove that microphone totally. So when I'm in other meetings with people and talking on Zoom meetings or doing other kinds of interviews, I'm not the guy with the gigantic podcast mic, right? Why do I have a podcast mic? I think it sounds podcasty, and I like that kind of thing. And I like that sort of, I know what I'm doing when I'm sitting around this microphone. So many equipment choices, like anything in your life, is not about equipment. It's not about the sound. It's not about the cost. It's about what makes you feel like you're doing the thing you want to be doing, right? Again, we're the most important player in all the stuff that we're up and doing. And somehow those choices feel like the right choice to you for some reason. So as you think about your gear, decide what you want. I have some friends who do podcasting and they're like, I don't know, I have a $1,500 mic. No, in my mind, no one needs a $1,500 mic. My buddy does. And I have another friend who does podcasts, and he's like, oh, I use this cheap little blue snowball microphone that for $79, I bought it. I feel great using that microphone, because my one friend feels really good when he has the best equipment available. My other friend feels really good when he uses something that he didn't have to spend a dime on. Now, is it different in quality or not? Probably not. They both probably sound great. People tend to listen to these things on their phone or on a treadmill at the gym. So really, does it make that huge a difference? No. But does it motivate the person to show up and sit down? Does it help the person tell themselves a story that they're doing the thing they want to do? Does it feel good to them? So it keeps them alive? Oh, it does all that. That's what this stuff is about, right? It's about the human experience of, does this keep you going and does it keep you moving? So you have a lot of choices, and the price range, it scans the market. You can record these things in podcast specific software. Dan will talk about this, that even if you're doing an interview with someone or you're recording something on just yourself, you can use some online software that records really great quality, and you can do it right off your phone, or you can do it right off of your computer. You don't have to have a soundboard or anything. You can get a simple little mic and plug it in. We'll talk about all that. Or you can have stuff recorded locally. You can do that on your phone. I have this little microphone here that's designed to go into your phone, and I have another microphone that's designed to go into your computer, and I have another microphone. I have 3 microphones sitting right here. I have another microphone that's designed to plug into a soundboard. It has one of those XLR things on the end. We'll talk about all that. So there's a lot of choices that you have about how you can put it together. My advice to you is to think a little bit about, what reaction do you have when you hear this? When you hear someone being like, hey, there's a whole lot of choices. Are you like, oh, there we go, I can't wait to learn about those choices? What is that? What are they? What's that microphone you just held up? Or are you someone that's like, oh no, there's a bunch of choices. This is the kind of stuff that just drives me crazy. I don't want to make a lot of choices. So we will,
Yeah.
we can't help you with that now, but in the launch project, we'll help you figure that out. Like, if you want our advice, we'll just say, buy this one, not that one.
Yeah,
Right?
I'll give you 2 options right now. If you're listening to this and you're like, that was a lot, I don't know what to do. I'll give you 2 options right now. There's kind of the USB, so you don't need any other adapters or interfaces. You got $100, you can get a great microphone. I think, Doug, you have one in the background somewhere. This Rode NT USB mini USB condenser microphone, $100. And then if you have a little more budget and you have a recording interface, it's called. It's a box that takes a signal from a regular microphone, turns it into a computer signal. Then the Shure SM7B is kind of the gold standard. That's what Doug's talking into right now. Podcasters really love this one. It looks cool. It sounds really good. But that's kind of a step up. It's $400, plus you usually need an additional little box that makes it sound better. It's called a cloud lifter. But those are 2 options. It's kind of the bare bones. You get this one microphone, the Rode, and you're ready to go, or the step up, the Shure SM7B, kind of podcast gold standard. So if you're like, someone tell me what to get, here's 2 options for you.
That's great. Yeah. And look, and there's nothing wrong with being someone, I don't want to put it on you like, hey, this is a bad thing if you have the attitude that, I want someone to tell me. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not stuff you care about, right? So, okay, it's not your thing. It's not your deal. If you're asking us, should I record this locally, meaning should I record it onto my computer, or should I record it into a software somewhere? Now that becomes another question about, what do you want to have to do with it afterward? There's some systems that you record it, and right from there you press upload, and it never sits on your computer. You don't have to do anything with the audio that you've recorded. It does all of it. Other stuff you record onto your computer, then you put into another software like GarageBand or Odyssey or Pro Tools. You play around with the audio. Dan will talk about that in a minute. You could do some editing and all that. So there's a whole range of all of this. None are better than the other. The question is, what do you want your workflow to be? How do you want that workflow to go? And what's going to keep you motivated and energized? Right? So it can be easy to get yourself not everybody's I was gonna say, it'd be easy for you to get yourself down a rabbit hole by watching a bunch of YouTube videos, but you might not be watching a bunch of YouTube videos on this. But if you do, you're going to hear things like, should I just use my phone? Should I use a USB microphone, meaning it just plugs right into your computer? Should I use an XLR one that's like a big official microphone? Should I use a soundboard? Do I use an audio interface? These are all really good choices. You should Google that, watch a bunch of YouTube videos about it. Or if you're going to, use our launch package, then we'll walk you through that and talk you through that and help you make those decisions that are best for you. By the way, we're not selling that stuff. Like we're not selling you a microphone. we don't make any money. We don't care particularly. We just want you to make sure that you have a system that's going to work really, really best for you. So I'll show you my setup here. This is so this other camera here. So I have this soundboard that runs right here, that when I'm recording audio on my end, it runs into this little whole soundboard. I have this separate microphone here that runs into this soundboard, and then that runs into my computer, and the USB microphone there, and have these little switchers to be able to, all the things you're seeing up on the screen, they come off these little switchers, and I can change camera angles by pushing these buttons, and I have 2 different monitors, and I have this thing up here, which is basically a really cheap teleprompter. So when I'm looking at the camera, I'm really seeing the screen. So I don't have to look down to see myself or to see you when I'm talking to you and then look up into the camera, right? It's all hidden behind this little, thing with an iPad and it's a $200 little setup, right? With a camera behind it. So this is a super complicated setup, right? It's pretty simple now. It's been more complicated other times in my life, but this is really complicated. You don't need anything that sophisticated. Or you might be like, no, you know what? I want something like that. Like, I want to set up a whole little studio. I like that kind of thing. Like, I like coming down into my basement and having a little studio and having a little light and guitars. I like this kind of stuff, right? Some people, they don't care for that. They don't want all of that. So the range for you you could do it from your phone. When we record our podcast, when I'm on the road or when we're Vocom and Good is on a tour or something, we're doing it literally off of a phone with a phone microphone plugged into it. They make really great little microphones you can plug straight into a phone, and it works fine too. But if I honestly were sitting in my basement or at my kitchen table and I was recording into my phone, I don't know. It doesn't feel like something that I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I'm recording a pod and I'm getting in my podcast mode, right? I'm like going to make something. I'm a content creator and I'm walking in and I'm sitting down to create some content. Like, I want the whole vibe and apparatus of all that stuff. So that's super important. And the more honest you can be with yourself about it, the better. All right, let's talk a little bit about editing, because this relates to all these questions. If you're going to record stuff using a system Dan will talk about, one where you record it right to a cloud computer somewhere, or you're recording this onto your hard drive or onto a little, audio card inside your soundboard. We have to take a card out and plug it into your computer and move the files and then take the files and put them into an editing software and do that editing. All those questions. It's going to basically come down to, do you want to edit? If you don't see yourself as an editor, like, you're going to take those audio files, you're going to pull them in, you're going to listen through it, you're going to pull out ums and ahs, you're going to add music, you're going to grab music files and pull them into a timeline. And if that stuff is not what you want to do, you have a couple of choices. One is you don't do it. You record it as it is. Maybe you cut off something at the beginning, something at the end. Maybe you add a little beginning music real simply inside of these online software, and that's it. You don't fix it. You don't change it. Or you ask someone to do it for you. You might have people in your life who are super good at that and glad to do it, and they'll take that audio and they'll do it. Excellent. Or you can hire us or some other groups like ours to do that for you. It gets expensive. It's a little bit expensive with us. It's really expensive with other people, but if you can get someone to do it, if you don't want to. So it's a bit of an on-off switch, but then when there's an on switch, like you want to have someone do it, there's a dimmer. So it's not like on-off where it's free and no editing, or expensive with editing. It can be free with no editing and ranges of expensive to have people go in and do that kind of work. So you have to ask yourself a question: how much do you want to do? If you're the kind of person who likes it or want to learn it, want to know it, you can do it all you want. There are a lot of very successful podcasts where they clearly are doing very little of that editing. Right? We're going to get to that in the best practices part in a minute. All right. So before we talk about how it's hosted, how posting goes, that's a lot right there, right? On that whole bit of what's your podcast, what's the content, how's it going, how do you do it? We've been at this for 42 minutes already. Comments, questions, that kind of thing that you have that we can answer for you right now. a little more interesting if you turn your mic on and ask it, but if you want to just type it in the chat, we can look in the chat as well. Anybody? Last call? See someone reaching for him.
Well, feel free to interrupt with a question if you got it. I'll just go over a couple quick things with recording itself. There's kind of two ways to do it. Generally, there's the software way, and there's a ton of options out there. We nerd out and compare and contrast, and there's several that are all really great options. The one we recommend is squadcast.fm. So this lets you, it's sort of like Zoom, but with better audio and better video recording capabilities. So whether you're just doing audio or you're doing audio plus video, this is a great platform. It lets you interview a guest. It captures the audio in high fidelity locally. So on your guest's computer, it's recording high quality audio. And that way, if the internet slows down in the middle, normally like in Zoom, you'd hear the audio get a little warbly or distorted or whatever. It's not capturing that. It's capturing high fidelity audio and then uploading it to the cloud after the interview is done. So you get really pristine, good audio. And what's neat about Squadcast is it can upload directly to like Dropbox or Google Drive. And so if you need to share your files with an editor, for example, does all that for you. Just a really neat platform for that. And then Logic is just a recording and editing software. It's, if you have a Mac, it's like GarageBand, but just with a few more bells and whistles. This is what a project looks like from my end when I'm editing one of our podcasts. And so you can see you've got individual tracks, and you can cut out dead air or ums or whatever. You can put music at the intro and outro, that sort of thing. This is called Logic, and this is kind of getting into the weeds of how much do you want to do? Do you want to be editing and chopping and cutting and pasting, all that? It looks a little daunting at first, but it's really, these programs are pretty intuitive, and it just takes a little time. But those are two general ways of capturing audio. Logic is also great if it's just you and you don't need to have a guest. You can just do this. You plug in your $100 microphone directly into your computer, hit record, and you're ready to go.
And those same interfaces and stuff can work if you want to record with someone else in the room with you. So if you have two microphones, you can plug two things into your computer and do a little audio interface. So there's a way to set this up. If your guest is live with you, or if you have a podcast partner and you're doing it, or there's 5 of you or something, you're all doing it together, you can do all that stuff live. Dan, what's the cost for using Squadcast, the software there that lets people?
Yeah, Dr. Johnson asked, are there fees for the Squadcast? Yeah, it's a monthly subscription. I think it's around $20 a month for just a single show. But you can just click over to squadcast.fm, and you can even do a free trial for a bit and see their pricing structure. And if you don't want to pay monthly, Zoom is functional as well. It's decent audio quality, but Squadcast is kind of the level up, really good audio quality. So
yeah, and that stuff really helps a lot. And it can be we're about to say, if you are going to do an audio only podcast, don't use Zoom to record guests that live somewhere else. Like if you need to chat with them, use something like squadcast.fm, right? For the recording. Everything about it's going to be better. The quality is going to be better. The way you get the audio files is going to be cleaner. It's just going to work better. If you need a free version, there's other ways to get a free version even than Zoom. Zoom's good if you need to record some audio and you don't want to use the audio interface that we use, which is a program called Ecamm. That's what makes all these little things show up on our screen, these logos down there and Dan having those things over there. That's all being run in a project called Ecamm, and we'll do a whole other webinar sometime on the video side of all this. So if that's something interesting to you. But if you're really doing an audio podcast, consider something other than Zoom. It can be a little hard for some people to be like, I don't know, there's some new link and do I have to download something? You won't have to a Squadcast. Yeah, I think I'm right about that. Is that true? It can
it's all on a website. They click a link and it's just as easy for the user as Zoom. So it's really, really nice.
Yeah. So it's super simple. And Michael puts in the chat that OBS is good too. There's a number of them. If you want our help or our work, we're going to suggest you use these because we have a whole workflow. So if you do our launch package or we keep working with you ongoing, we have a whole way we want to do it. And if you're really committed to something else, I'm sure we could work it out, but we would just prefer that there's a really streamlined system that allows all that to work. So there's a lot of options and you can make all that work, and getting it from your mouth to someone else's ears can be very fast. There are some systems that you can just record it live and click publish and it publishes. I used to use a system called Spreaker. It's pretty good. It's still out there. They're a big player in the world. You can get a Spreaker thing and just go nearly live. You can go actually live and you can do it nearly live as well. It makes a little bit of edits and there's no work at all after that. You just record and done and post, and that's it. And you have a preset like beginning music and outgoing music, and that's that. So there's lots of options for DIY. If you're the DIY kind of person, we'd encourage you to go DIY. Think it's probably better if you get a little bit of support and help at the start. That's why we do this launch package that lets people sort of get going, and 2 sessions and we help you on the first 2 podcasts and kind of get you rolling, and then you feel confident and you're ready to go. But you can do a lot of this stuff on your own, especially the hosting and the posting side of it. All right, let's talk a little bit about guests. For those of you who are thinking about having guests, let me just say we do a lot of guests. I like guests. I love interviews. Interviews is top notch for me. It's what I want to be doing. It's a lot of work to manage guests. It's a lot of work to set up when you're going to when someone's available. You send them an email. They send you an email. If it's somebody famous that you want to talk to, maybe you're working through a third party person that promotes for them. Maybe they have a book or maybe they have an agent. So you got all that stuff going on. You got to find a time. Then they log in and then you log. There's a lot. And then you have to manage the guest when you're done with that. So if you're going to do guests that are people you don't know or famous people that you want to help your podcast get listeners because you're interviewing that person, it's complicated. If you're good at that kind of thing, you're comfortable with it, you can do scheduling and all that, great. That's not really what you want to do and be interfacing. If you're thinking like, I don't even know, how would I even get someone who's famous? Well, you'd be surprised if someone has a book out or someone has a big project that they're pushing. You send a note to their publicist from their website and say, I have a podcast, I'd like them to come on. You'd be shocked how many people say yes, because they want to talk to as many people as they possibly can. People will say yes, but it's complex on your end. It just takes a lot. So if you're going to do it, just know that's a whole thing. There's a whole period of your time and energy and life for your podcast that's going to go into managing guests. So if that's the way you're doing it, just know that's something you really do have to think a lot about and how you get all that arranged. That's separate from any of the time of recording or editing or posting or telling people about it. It's another thing altogether. Even if they're friends of yours or coworkers of yours or people in your same organization you want them on, you'll run into this, right? Like, oh my gosh, how could this be so hard for us to find a time to record this podcast? So that's just something that is increasingly complex as you start to do all of this. All right, let's talk about quote best practices when it comes to podcasting. There really aren't any. This is still the Wild West of creativity and innovation. I mean, truth be told, there are podcasts that range, as I said earlier, from a few minutes to 3 hours long that are all high value, high listening podcasts that millions of people love and listen to. The content ranges from super serious to the sublime to the nonsense. It doesn't really, there is no content that sort of works. So don't worry about the vibe. Good golly, the vibes are all over the place. There's vicious voices saying something urgent and shaking you by the collars. There's some that are just goofy as can be. There's some that are just on laser point on a topic. Dan will probably give you an illustration here of a friend that's starting a podcast on a topic that you're like, are there 5 people who care about that, let alone people who listen to a podcast doing really well? Quality all over the place. People who run their podcasts audio through entire, systems to balance it, make it ideal for headphones and for listening in the car and for listening, just on the speaker on your phone or on your computer. And they do a thing to make it kind of be in that perfect NPR like, soundscape. And there's some that honestly, they're the 2 people you have to turn the volume up when one person's talking and turn it down when another person's talking. And these are podcasts that I listen to all the time, and people love them, and they're highly ranked. I say all of that so that you don't think what I need to do is follow these best practices, and that's the only way it's going to work, or I can't do it if I can't do this, or if I do those things that this other podcast is doing, that's the trick. That's what will make it work. Whatever the magic is that allows some podcasts, the most important thing you could do to have a really powerful, listened to, influential podcast is be famous. So if you're not already famous, get famous. And if you're going to try to get famous by your podcast, that's tough. So if you take that off the table, right? I'm not famous, probably not going to become famous. So what am I going to do? I'm going to produce a quality piece that feels good to me that I'm glad to have in the world. That's what you can do. And that's what you should do. So it's a podcast that when you meet someone, you can say, I do a podcast and I would love for you to listen to it. This is the same advice that I got as an author of books and I give to other authors. Write something that you want to tell other people about when you're done with it. Right? That you are your best and sometimes only marketer, and you're the person. So that thing that's working for you, that's the magic. Other best practices, I think your best practices all come down to workflow so that you are in the world, you're doing it consistently, and you're doing it with some level of ease and passion. And when you're done, you're like, I can't wait to do it again, or I'm willing to do it again, rather than, oh my gosh, if I have to keep doing this podcast, this was a terrible, terrible mistake. That happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think find your niche is a decent best practice. I've got a friend that created a podcast about saltwater aquarium like design. Not even like you might have the fish in your house. This is next level, even beyond that. He designs the seascapes within the aquariums, and he made a podcast and gets tens of thousands of downloads because he found his niche. And it, you probably have a community like that. There might only be 5 people in your town that are into the thing you're into, but expand that out across the country and the world, and you have an audience. It's just a matter of tapping into that community and finding your little place in it. So I wouldn't worry too much about, like Doug said, like you're not going to get famous. You're probably not going to get rich. You're not going to be the next Joe Rogan and get $100 million, deal from Spotify or whatever. But do something that you love and do something that you can't not do. I'm also a musician. You can see some of the gear in the background, and I do it because I can't stop doing it. And so find something that you love to talk about. You annoy people with how much you like to talk about it, and find the people that want to listen.
And if you're already creating content for some other reason, figure out a way to make it podcast capable. That's really one of the better things. And as you start to think like a podcast, you're going to be like, man, I should have been recording this. That's when you know it. That's when you know it's got you, right? All right. So what are costs that go into this? Well, free or nearly free is an option, and then paid services. So free can be, you get quality help from someone who does it for you, ask around. Like, honestly, before you hire us, ask around in your world and your network and say, is there someone who can do this stuff with me? Because maybe there is. Or then there's paid services. We're going to offer you, the $700 starter package, and then you can spend more money after that, a couple $100 per episode if you want us to edit it. We'll talk about that in a second. And it gets really expensive from there, thousands and thousands of dollars for a podcast. So the range is all over the map, right? Free to super expensive. And we're on the very low end of the paid service side. That's where we want to see ourselves. Let's talk about income. What should you expect? Well, not a lot. Don't plan on the podcast generating a lot of income. A nice goal to set, though, is, hey, could I get enough people to listen to this, and then the people who listen to contribute in some way, Patreon or something, to like pay for all my costs of this thing? Could I crowdsource getting this thing going? Could I ask a group of people who care about what I do to chip in so that I could get a podcast going and make it happen in the world? You would be surprised how many people would say yes to that in your world. If you said, hey, it's going to cost me $500 or $5,000 to make a podcast, right? And I really want to do this thing. Who's interested in helping me get this going? Well, if you work for an institution that has a budget, ask them if you can make it work for the institution, right? An investment for getting their content out. But then start asking around to other people in your life. I mean, people are like, I'd totally chip in $50 or $25 or $100 for you to get this thing going. That would be great. Or if you have a birthday, you're like, hey, chip in on this thing, or don't, a Christmas gift or whatever, a Hanukkah gift. Like, however you do it, feel free to ask people to help make this thing possible. Set a little budget, figure out how much it is. If you do the thing with us that we'll talk about in a minute, we'll help you figure out all that. You'll know how much things should cost, how much your monthly, thing, if you're going to use Squadcast, and if you're going to have to upload to Podbean, how much is that? These like $10 and $20 a month kinds of things can start to add up, right? You're like, I don't know, this thing's going to cost me $900 this year to run a podcast, or I'm going to do it all for free, right? The range, of course, is there. But then just start saying like, okay, who's in on this thing with me? Who wants to do it? Put it out on social media and ask people, hey, do you think I should do a podcast on this? And who would be? I'm telling you, people are going to be like, oh, totally. I mean, some of you are in here because we've talked before and people came up to you and said, you should do a podcast. So you all are worthy of it. You all should do it. And once you do, there's a way to cover those costs. Trying to make a lot of money off of it, let me just suggest to you, you're probably not going to be picking up ads on your podcast that are directed toward you. And if you're thinking about going the ad revenue route, you can, but just know that you're going to then have to have someone whose job it is to be the ad revenue manager, someone who recruits those ads, talks to the people, deals with that relationship. They don't just come for free and easy. There's a whole thing. There's a whole back end that goes around anybody that has ads on videos or audio. That's handled by a whole other side to the work. So you have the podcast itself, you have the guest management, and then you have this income that's coming in from sponsors. If you want to go down that route, that's doable. Obviously, people do it. We all listen to podcasts that are paid, but they also have people doing all that work. So if you're not planning to do, or if you're not planning to be that person or planning to hire someone to be that person, then just be realistic about that at this stage. All right, Dan, you want to talk a little bit about our project and what we have going on?
Well, in the chat, we have a question, where do you host, which is probably a good thing to talk about too. We use a platform called Podbean, and this is another spot where there are a lot of options and none of them are terrible. This is just the one we've been using for a while and are familiar with, and we're kind of in the ecosystem. You can start out very cheap, and obviously you can see on the screen they have a few different tiers. If you're just doing a single show, you're probably looking at that basic or unlimited audio tier, which is only like $9 a month. So that's pretty affordable, right? You can carve that out of your budget and make that happen, and you can step up from there, like all of these other areas. But Podbean is what we use. It's pretty simple. In this starter package, we'll talk about one of the things we help you do is set all this up. because there are just a lot of like back end and initial setup hoops to jump through. It's a lot of just knowing from trial and error, like, okay, now I have to send this link to iTunes so it gets there. There's just a lot of that, but that's one of the things we help you with. It's all doable on your own as well, um, but it's a little legwork to get it all set up initially.
So we have the starter package. The starter package is $700. I've talked with some of you before about all this, and we've had different prices. This is what we've landed on. Is this $700 get you off the ground? And Dan can talk about what's involved. And then if you do, once you do that package and sort of get going, if you want our services ongoing, then we customize that for you depending on how much work you want to have done. So in other words, if you're like, you know what I want to do? I want to record the audio. I want to be done with it and then have someone go in and do some edits and put some things out and post it and put in show notes and do all that. We have people that do that. So we do that for our work and we can do it for your work. So that stuff, we can take all of that, or we can do a $700 project to help you get going, help you launch 2 podcasts, get yourself up and running, and then you take it over from there and you do it from that point on. So Dan, is that good enough? Or
Yeah.
should I say more about that? You want to talk about the?
Yeah, I'll get into this. One of the biggest hurdles of starting a podcast is starting. There's just so many decisions, so many little details, and so it can seem daunting, like all the hosting sites and the recording software and which microphone. And so once you get that first episode under your belt, it becomes so much easier to keep going on your own with a podcast, whether it's in seasonal form, you put out 10 episodes, or you do it weekly. And so we've created this launch package where we help you get your podcast off the ground. So we do a pre-production consultation. We help walk through like, what is your show about? What is the format? Who is your audience? And then we get into the weeds with the technical stuff. Like, we think based on who you're interviewing and all of this, this is the microphone you need, and this is the gear you need to plug into your microphone to make it work. So we'll walk through all of those decisions with you. And then strategy, like, how do you launch this? How do you use your circles of influence to help get it out into the world? How do you connect with your audience and grow your show? And then we complete an entire pilot episode for you. We produce it. We make sure you are set up to record it. We record it with you. We'll edit it. We'll master it, which is bringing the overall volume up and making it sound, like you hear a podcast on iTunes or whatever. And then we help you publish it. We help you set up your Podbean show. We do all the back end so it gets to iTunes, it gets to all the other places. We help you set it up so that when you say, "Hey Alexa, play my podcast," it plays from Alexa. And then we do things like a 1-minute promotional trailer that you can share on social media. One of those audiograms, if you've seen them. It's like usually a static image with the little squiggly line of the audio going. So kind of a trailer to catch people's attention. And then a social media series of templates. So some graphic design goes into that, and some templates that you can slap in a new image each episode moving forward. And then a pass the baton episode. This is where we'll walk with you. So we've done an episode for you. Now we're going to walk with you and help you understand, like, oh, is this where I need to click this? And yep, we're right there with you to answer those questions. Make sure you're set up for success. And then this episode template. I mentioned I use Logic as the recording and editing software. So what we would do is give you a Logic file, and it has all the presets, like what EQ makes your voice sound really good. It's ready to just drop the new audio file in. So all those settings, if we've done some intro, outro music, that's all in there. So future episodes, you're ready to just drop in your fresh audio and plug and play in that way. So the idea is, though, to set you up for success and get this thing off the ground and into the world. And yeah.
And then if you want to keep that going with our work and say like, hey, I want you all just keep doing that stuff with me, then we work that out with you on an ongoing basis if that's work that you want to do. I'll just mention again, if you're seeing this on a recording after March 1st, 2023, when we're launching all of this, it may have different pricing. This is the special pricing that we're doing for the people who said yes to this through all of our Vocom and good communication stuff at the start to get going. So to all of you in the Zoom and the other people who are in this thing, is the pricing. It's been double this amount in our stuff before, but we want to make sure that all of you, after talking to you, and we know that some of you are like, I just think that's more expensive than I can handle. We want to make sure that you have a chance to give this a try and can get going. There's other people who we know will pay those higher prices, and they have no problem with it, but we want to make sure that all of you have a chance to get this going if this is something you can figure out. So we're ready to start this now. We'll also be making a big push. The official launch of all this is March 1st of 2023. But if some of you are saying to yourselves like, no, I think I'm pretty much ready, or I want to get locked in here and get this thing moving and start talking with Dan and Britton and others who make all this stuff happen, we can get that going with you right now before March, or we'll be doing more. Then there'll be a more automated way for somebody to go on the website and fill out a form and get signed up and all the rest of that. But right now, this is happening between the people on this call and the other people that are watching this before March 1st. It's a little more hand-holding process before we sort of launch the rest of it. So, okay, questions, comments from anybody? We'll look in the chat, or if you want to turn your microphone on. So the rest of it, I know we're 10 minutes over the total of 1 hour, so I know some people had to cut away, but if you have time, we have time.
Hey, Doug, when as far as that starter package goes, how do we get in touch with you as far as because I need to discuss that with folks I'm doing it with and so forth. How do we get back in contact with you? That's something we want to pursue.
Yeah, Dan at votecommongood.com is the email. That's Dan that's on there, and that's the person. If you're in this, if you signed up for this by telling us that you're in this meeting, if not, if you'll put it if you just saw this in our regular email and signed up, like you didn't fill out one of the forms that got you into this thing, if you just came because you saw the email Friday or today, put your name in an email in the chat, and we'll send you an email to follow up of all this, which includes the recording. If you want to share with us, we'll just make all that stuff easily available to you. So if you didn't sign up that way, for any of you, if you didn't sign up that way, put your name and email in the chat, and we'll grab them before we go and make sure that you get on that list.
And we can send you a PDF as well of that starter package so you can share it with your team or your partner or whoever.
And then next steps are Dan then sets up a meeting with you, and we start into the process, and you figure out a time where you have enough, hour to set aside where you're going to talk about all this stuff, and send you a thing about what questions you've already have answered, because we don't spend any time. If you're like, hey, I'm settled, I know my mic, I got him in my closet over here, and I just don't know what to do with them. Like, all of our work from this point forward with all of you is customized to your circumstance and situation, right? So we'll gather up some of that information before the meeting, just so we know what you're already ready to do and how you're already ready to go. So that'll be the next step. It'll start with communication that Dan will be leading from here on out.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have content already. I've written about 25 short pieces that tell the story in first person of somebody from the Bible. And they've been well received when I've just read them to people. But I also have found pictures on the internet, which I'm pretty sure are not common domain. So I'm assuming that if I wanted to include those in the podcast, I would need to get permission from the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, am I making this more difficult for myself, or do I need to do that?
Yeah, if it's copyright material, you do have to license it. Images are a little gray. It depends on a few things, but the moral, ethical thing is to license it.
Is to what?
To license it, that's to pay for use of the image or song or whatever.
Okay.
That's another thing we'll get into. Like if you want to have an intro song for your podcast,
Okay.
that's something that you have to license from the creator of that song. And there's web platforms where you can find music and stuff like that.
Okay.
But yeah, images would be neat. We just have to make sure that it's all legal and everyone's getting paid for their.
Yeah, that was kind of what I figured. I'm not anywhere near being ready to record or put any money into this yet, but this has been extremely helpful today.
Good.
And I also have some editing of the text that I need to do.
Mhm.
But I really am excited about the possibility of getting this out into the world. I've shared it with people on a couple of Zoom meetings, and they're like, "You've got to podcast this. You've got to podcast this."
And they're
Yeah, that
right.
sounds like
It's
great
good.
material ready to go. So yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty close. I just am right at the very beginning of thinking about how to do this. So
Mm-hmm.
this has
Great.
been really helpful, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's great.
Any other comments or questions? I want to ask Michael if he'll just share a little bit about what he's willing to offer to all of you as well. And Sean and Jane, I see your emails there in the chat. If anybody else wants to put their email in the chat, so we sure we add you to the list. We'll pop it in there. We'll do that. Michael, would you tell people what you're willing to do and the kind of good skill that you have and all the rest of it? Because being a part of a DIY community is also what we want to have happen. We're going to invite you all to join a Facebook group and be in an email chain and some other stuff about all this, because we want there to be, hundreds of people that are helping each other make good podcasts. And some people have a lot to offer, and Michael is one of those. So. Unless Michael's not with us anymore. I should have. Well, anyway, yeah, you could talk to you could talk to Michael. He had to go, I guess. I have another meeting. Yeah, he did right in here. He said I have another meeting. Okay, so anyway, Michael has a great podcast and YouTube channel that's related to his the church that he does, and it's really great. He's in the best sense of the term, a super nerd on all this stuff. It's extraordinarily kind and helpful. So he wants to help people. If you're looking for some help, we'll include it in the email that we send out, his contact information. You can be in touch. And if any of the rest of you are good at this stuff too, and you want to help other people, or if you just like chatting about it, or, we'll do some regular like meetings like this, Zoom meetings for people that are in our podcast network and media network and all this, and just let people share stuff like, hey, I tried this microphone, or I did this thing, or I'm now using Ecamm, or I stopped using this thing, just that kind of stuff. So you feel like there's a little group of people that you're running around with when you're up and in doing all of this work.
I have a question. Would it make sense to try to help other people to learn the process better, or do you really think it makes more sense if you have an idea yourself to just jump in and do it?
Boy, that's a good question. Like, how much do you need to be skilled up before you get going?
Yeah.
I know it's hard to it's hard to know. This is like swimming lessons with kids. You're like, I don't know. Sometimes you get in the water. The best way to learn how to swim is in the water, right?
Yeah.
That's why I suggest produce a couple of episodes before you put them out there, before you tell people, before you've set a schedule for yourself. See how it went. You've recorded it. You went back and listened to it. You got over all that. Like, you kind of got before the pressure is fully on. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to be like, okay, I'm not even sure I want to pay for a start. Maybe I just want to kind of just start this stuff. And look, you don't even have to have another microphone. Pull your phone out, or you're on a computer already that's picking up audio, hit record, on your thing, start a Zoom meeting if you don't know how to do it any other way, and hit record. And it's just you in the Zoom meeting. And when it says record to this computer, say, yeah, record to your computer and watch yourself, like, just get going. and get something out there and figure out where you are in the world. And then, look, I'm not your therapist, but I'll also say this. Then ask yourself, are you the kind of person that tends to tell yourself, I'm not ready? Or are you the kind of person that tends to say, like, no, I'm ready, and you're totally not? Like, just do an evaluation, be like, okay, I tend to hold back too long. I was ready a long time ago. Or I want to, I don't want to, follow all of my instincts on this one. I want to give it a pause and see where, like, just kind of measure yourself, figure out where you are. And then when you're somewhere near-ish ready, get going, because you're not going to get any better planning to get better.
Mhm. And there's also a little bit of imposter syndrome to get over. Like, well, I'm not an expert in this topic, or I'm not great at this technical stuff. But you can be an excited learner, and people are interested in learning with you. So I say, yeah, just jump in.
Well, I am trying to use beginner's mind
Yeah.
and saying yes and, because that's what the improv actors do in
Yep.
order to move something forward. And this is part of my idea for what I want to do. I want to share positive things with people, and I actually have my own thing that I think is my brand. I mean, some
Mhm.
person told me I couldn't copyright my idea, but I still believe in it, and I'm not going to stop believing in it because it's part of me.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Right.
And someone in the chat says, how do you record on a PC? There's a few different programs that you can put on your computer, or you can use one of these web-based platforms like Squadcast. It's all done online in the cloud, so you don't need to download any new programs. So that
Okay.
works on Mac or PC.
Thank you.
Yeah, right now all I have is a smartphone, and I don't have a microphone. So maybe start with the, or maybe I just need to record.
Yeah.
You're right. I can't second guess myself. I just have to get started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And look, there's some software that can go on your phone, whether it's an Android or an Apple phone, that's a little podcast studio, and
Okay.
just ready to go. Voice recorder or a little podcast thing. Like, there are a bunch of them. You just go into the Google store or the App Store or whatever, and find like podcast in your pocket, whatever they are, and they're ready to go. And it's pretty cheap to get a little microphone, from $29 to $99 for a really great quality microphone. If you want to have something separate that sits a little closer to your, or if you don't want to just hold your phone or something. But also you'll get it. Like, you'll figure it out, and you'll be like, well, that room was super noisy, or shouldn't have set that on a hard table and then talked. I should have put a little towel down and then set my phone on top of it, and then it sounded much better when I was like, you'll just start figuring it out, or you'll read something somewhere, or all the rest of it. Or if you're into YouTube videos, just YouTube, like recording a podcast on my phone. You'll
Got
be
it.
surprised how many people have 400,000 views of some video of them talking about how to record on the phone, because you're not the only one trying to figure out how to record a podcast on my phone. So there's a lot of help out there, and some of the rest of it. I will just say, none of this stuff can happen without having spent some money. You spent money
I
on
understand.
so you're in, right? You've already done that big thing. Like, you have a world-class computer in your hand, so you're ready.
Yes.
Right? And you don't have to spend a whole lot more, or you could spend a little bit more, but spend as much money as makes you feel alive and good about it. And that's
Got
really
it.
what you have to do. It can be as elaborate as you want it to be. And
Well,
isn't going to be any better if, quality, like, there's no standard you're trying to reach. So just figure you out in what makes
well,
life.
I'm a musician too. I'm a singer primarily, and I loved what you guys said about figure out what makes your voice sound good. Because I mean that is how, I mean, what people listen to is that you're excited about it. I mean, that's what they'll listen to, but it'll
Yeah.
help if you enhance your voice, I
Mhm.
believe.
Well, totally. And that's another thing that if you record into one of those little softwares that you can put on your phone, it makes you can make some adjustments in there. Some of them are free, right? Free app on your phone. It's like, oh, add a little bass or take out a little bit of treble or raise the mids. You can start, and what that'll do is help you feel good about what you're putting out in the world, right? That's what
Yeah.
it make a difference to anybody. No, but you're gonna feel like, I don't know, I like my voice when it sounds like that, and I don't like it when it
Mhm.
sounds like that. Those are good things, right? Like that's not vanity or silliness or any of the rest of it. Those are the good things. I see
Well,
that Alicia
oh,
is
it's time.
in
Okay.
that she has written that she wonders if all of the things we recommended are compatible with Apple, Mac, and they are. That's what we use. We use Apple.
Yes, I have an iPhone.
Okay, yeah. So
Um,
everything on our end is all Apple-y.
and the PDF thing of your presentation for the package would be great. I tried to take notes the whole time, but knowing what you guys are going towards, and I just I'm so grateful that you guys want to help more people get their good voices out into the world. I believe there should be good news, not the icky news. There's so many good things going on.
What we think
Mhm.
about it. There's too much good stuff going on to only have some voices be saying certain things, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We have a phrase around our world. It's time to turn up the volume, both the decibel level and the amount of the volume
Yes.
in that sense. Just think there needs to be more things, and you're all part of that. And that's part of the problem is that we certain people from certain perspectives tend to go through their life with their mute on, and we just want to encourage people to take that mute off and get moving,
Got it.
do their thing. All right, so we
Thank
will
you.
be in touch. Please, if you feel like, hey, I didn't hear from you all like in the next 24 hours with the PDF thing and all the rest, then something didn't go right, right? It's either went in a junk mail or we didn't have your email proper or something. So I did get one from Sean and from Jane and from Richard and from Alicia. I hope I'm saying all those names right. This is not Janie and Alicia, but I got those. So if anybody else has an email that you're not sure we have it, put it in the chat. And the way Zoom works, the chat goes away. So once I end this thing, there's a there's a bomb that goes off somehow that eliminates all these things. So, all right.
Yes, I know. That's the awful part.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Thank you for an hour and a half of your time. Thanks for considering making a podcast. And we are thrilled with it. And, find the Vote Common Good podcast when they exist. We have this one on Christian nationalism coming out, a bunch of other stuff, and a whole lot of content that we put out on a regular basis. So we'd love to have you part of our world.